Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Rhode Island Small Business Coalition's live forum. I'm your host, David Dadekian, a small business owner here in Rhode Island. I own Eat Drink Rhode Island. And today we've got a great guest. We've got Helena Buonanno Foulkes. She is running for governor on the Democratic ticket here in Rhode Island. Of course, there's a large group of people running this year, so I hope you're paying attention to what's going on in the news and to our show. We've got a lot of great candidates being interviewed here on the show. And the primary date for the Democratic primary, well, for both Democratic and Republican, but in this case, we've got a Democratic candidate, is Tuesday, September 13th. So keep that in mind. And please welcome to our program, Helena Buonanno Foulkes.
Hi, David. Good to see you. Hi, everyone.
Just give it a moment as the internet catches up. Great. Hello, Helena. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, David. This is fun.
Why don't I give you a chance, since it's a little different than some of our other shows? Why don't I give you a chance to just do a quick who you are introduction to our listener.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to be on, and thanks everyone for tuning in. So my name's Helena Buonanno Foulkes. I was born and raised in Rhode Island. I grew up in Providence. I'm the oldest of 5 kids. And my dad was a small business owner, my grandfather, my great grandfather, all in Providence. So I aspired to be a business leader when I was a young girl. And I came back to Rhode Island after school and started working in Woonsocket at CVS, a not so small business. It became a much bigger business over time. But I really loved my career. I was very lucky. I had never worked anywhere more than 2 years, and I ended up spending 25 years at CVS. And really, I became the entrepreneur within a big company. I loved driving innovation, making things happen, really care a lot about the people who worked for me, the customers we had. And so really understand that for all of you who are listening, you live in a world where you've got huge responsibilities. You've got employees you're taking care of. You've got customers you're taking care of. And that's how I saw my career. And I think that's why I was able to be successful. Anyway, I'm now running to be governor of Rhode Island. I care a lot about this state. I've been very worried about what's been happening in COVID, especially women and people of color have really taken a hit. But at the same time, I'm an optimist, and we have billions of dollars coming in from the federal government. And I want to make sure we set ourselves up for a great future. So we could talk more, but my 3 main topics are education, affordability, and driving a great economy. And at the end of the day, I think the thing that's unique about me is I know how to get stuff done. And that's because of my business career. So I'm not a politician, but I do know how to make change happen. And I'd love to do that for the people of Rhode Island.
Well, that sounds great. I think, as we've discussed on the show previously, everything really touches on small business here in Rhode Island. It's really interesting. Even education and affordability and housing, things of that nature, touches on small business. But we're going to, try to focus on the business issues that you mentioned on your website and in other interviews. Specifically the economy. I also want to mention, though, it's funny, we also had people on here before. We've mentioned CVS, and obviously CVS is a huge corporation now. But it was at one point, many years ago, a small business, right?
Well, this is what I often say. CVS was founded by 2 brothers in Woonsocket, Rhode Island in 1963. I'm still very close to Stanley Goldstein. And I often say, imagine when Stanley started this business, that it could become a Fortune 10 company. And I think that there are others out here right now in Rhode Island. I would love to be able to foster them and help them grow into a big success story, because it's exciting for the state of Rhode Island to have companies like that who are thriving. And by the way, then create other small businesses in the ecosystem around them.
Great. Well, let's start there. Let's start with your proposal for the qualified small business stock tax benefit.
Yes.
I know that, what I looked at and read about it on your site, it was, is it specific to the blue tech startups, or are we looking at it really for any small business?
It is specific for blue tech. And what I really believe very firmly is that I want to make Rhode Island lean into our strengths and allow us to succeed in a broader way. And I think oftentimes we're trying to catch up with other states, and we try to take a little bit of the crumbs coming down from Boston. So when I look at Rhode Island and I think about our strengths, we have 400 miles of ocean, which is spectacular. And we've got URI School of Oceanography. We've got the Naval War College, where most of the U.S. Deep sea underwater research happens. We already have emerging companies who are taking advantage of this. And so just as Boston a decade ago created a life sciences bond to make sure that we were investing in an infrastructure to allow those to succeed, I'd like to do the same for Rhode Island and make sure that small businesses can thrive in that environment. And therefore, to your point, I'd like to double the tax benefits for investing in small businesses, because I think it's a way to create the incentives for people to be leaning into Rhode Island as an investment opportunity.
So it borrows a little bit from Massachusetts, but that's okay in this case because it's a good thing.
Okay, I'm always looking for good ideas from other places. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's my business career too. We don't need to reinvent the wheel.
Right, exactly. You don't always have to. Right, that's a good point. So, all right. Well, let's talk about the blue jobs in general. I know you also have an idea for a blue jobs bond in your policy issues. Talk about that. Talk about what I think blue jobs is a thing those of us in the small business community know well. But let's try and give a good overview for it for folks watching.
Yeah, that's right. So this is a way for, as I said, for us to really be a leader in the sector. And so you look at what. If I just build on our strengths, first in the nation to have an offshore wind farm. We have billions of dollars coming from the federal government to make sure that we've got an infrastructure for electric vehicles. So you start to think about where are all the investment strategies that are needed. We've got great ports, but we do need to make sure that we're investing more in our port and the sectors around them. So you start to think about all the ways that I think when it happens really well, you've got government, business, and universities, those three sectors working together to make something big happen. And when I talk to people who were at the ground for this to happen in life sciences in Boston, what they often say to me is, Helena, there was a culture there where these three sectors came together and they shared in the wins. No one was trying to take all the credit, and so I want to be the leader who can pull these different sectors together. And the bond is a big part of this, but really making sure that we've got all the pieces in place so that businesses can thrive. And the reason I want businesses to thrive is that's how people build great futures. That's how we lift Rhode Islanders up and make sure that our children and our grandchildren can have great futures here. I hear so often from people who say, I love this state. Look at all our assets, but my kids need to leave this state if they want to have a great career, great future. So I think this is why it matters. It matters a lot, so we can make sure we keep our talent here and attract new talent too, which I saw very closely when I was at CVS as we were thriving and growing, is we were attracting more people to come to the state.
Certainly. Yeah, no, it's an excellent point to that they're, the jobs need to be here for the people to stay here. And again, back to what I was saying, the education needs to be there for the people to get the jobs and so on and so forth. URI is a great example. You did mention URI and oceanography. I know there's a lot going on there. The offshore wind farms, I mean, essentially, they're bigger now, but they also were essentially small startups when this all started to happen. Let's talk a little bit also about fishing, our aquaculture. I mean, these are things that were really key to Rhode Island and really can be a huge asset to Rhode Island, especially with the ports, like you mentioned. Where do you see those types of businesses involved in this economy as well?
Yes, it's such a good example. I'm really glad you brought up fishing and aquaculture, and ag tech is another part of this too. And really, one of the things that's so interesting to me about Rhode Island is we only produce 1.5% of what we all consume from a food perspective. You're in the food business. I don't need to tell you this. And so a big opportunity is to make sure that we grow the infrastructure so we are able to have healthy ways of feeding people within the state. And so the fishing industry is critical to this. Certainly, I think this is a very good example where the power of government to work to make sure that the fishing industry can thrive as we are building these offshore wind farms. That's a very important factor that I think a governor needs to lead into, but also making sure that we have the right infrastructure set up so that we can help these small businesses who are really doing innovative things around the water space, around farming, and listening very closely to the people who live in those communities. I know that there are certain concerns that come up as we try to innovate, but I'm excited about what Rhode Island could do. I think this could be a place where we really become a shining star for the rest of the country.
Absolutely. I mean, and yeah, that balance needs to be found. I know there's been a lot
Mhm.
of talk about that in the last few years. But
Yeah,
if from my perspective, knowing some of these farmers essentially that farm in the
yeah.
water, some of these things are brand new technologies that again could be really leveraged
Yes.
to bring. We're never going
And
to have. Thankfully,
I've thought about that too, because one of the things I've done is I've listened to a lot of these small business owners and leaders to understand, what do you need from us? Beyond the
yeah,
big bond idea, which I do have. But a lot of what I hear is help streamline the decision making and permitting process so we just find out sooner. And I'm sure you hear this too, David, but they'll go through a process where they're proposing an expansion, let's say, and they go down the DEM stream and the DOT stream, and they, after a couple years, they come up with very different answers from both departments, and therefore they're stuck in limbo. And I think that as someone who grew up in the business sector, what I really understand is designing process to work for the end user. The end user in this case being the businesses who need to have an
yeah,
answer one way or the other. They often say to me, I'd rather just know early if the answer is no. I don't want to wait
that
two
is
or
very
three
true.
years.
Yeah, that
And
is
so
that.
that's not rocket
It's so
science.
weird to say that. Yeah, it's very strange to say that out loud, but even a no is important sometimes to get your business moving.
Even a no, exactly, because then I know what I got to do and I can move on. And
Yeah,
so, and this falls into the example of people say you got to know a guy, because what happens is they'll call a very senior person they know in state government, which maybe gets them what they want, but they know that's not right either. They know we
right.
should be setting up a structure where we can all get answers sooner and do the right answers and balance all the complexity of it and make sure that we're supporting them and coming to a decision, to your point. So that's the kind of leadership that I bring. It's what I know how to do. A lot of that depends on having great leaders who work for the governor, who know how to get things done. This is my whole platform is around getting things done. And a big part of it is having a talent pool around me. And that's what I did my whole career. I had my last job at CVS, I had 200,000 people working for me. And I only say that because I couldn't do anything without great leaders. I had to have people smarter than me working for me, who were empowered to go make things happen. That's what I'd love to bring to state government.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a key to anyone who owns a small business and grows a small business knows is you can't do everything yourself, and
Yeah.
therefore you need to find and hire the best people around you. But also, so that's a good segue into the next point here that I was going to pull onto is this Government Services Delivery Council.
Yes.
You've got this on the site about agencies interacting directly with the public and interacting within themselves as well. Talk about that a
Mhm.
little bit because it's an
Yeah.
interesting issue here in the island.
Well, I always like to frame these in stories because for me, they help resonate and create the policy angle of it. I met recently with some people in the building sector and construction sector, and we were having a conversation about how do we increase the percentage of minority-owned businesses who can thrive in the state and in the sector. And one of the stories that they shared with me is this idea that there are many organizations who exist to help small minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses thrive, but because they are so siloed themselves, what happens is you often get someone who's kind of graduating from one of the programs who's learned the experience set within that program, but is actually missing big chunks of what need to happen to actually be allowed to be successful. In this particular example they were sharing with me, these were people who graduated from a program but weren't prepared for the process where they get interviewed and asked a very simple question, which is, do you have an accountant on your team who's not a family member? That's like a basic example of being prepped to win a
Mm.
contract. So I think these are the ways, and what I do think the council could do is bring to us, what are all the pain points small businesses are experiencing? That could be the minority-owned businesses in this example, or that could be one of my most poignant examples was I met with a group of small business owners. They were in the restaurant industry, actually, David. And one of them shared with me that he owns 2 restaurants in Pawtucket and 1 in Woonsocket. one in Worcester. And he said to me, Helena, when I opened the second restaurant in Pawtucket, I had to go to 13 different websites and locations to get all the
Yep.
paperwork and regulatory forms filled out. And in Worcester, when I opened my new restaurant, I had a one-stop shop concierge service. Like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
We can do that. That doesn't rely on brand new legislation. And, this is about organizing government so it really works for the people and the business owners who hire people and build great futures for the people of Rhode Island. So those are the kinds of things I would expect to learn from a council like that. And then, as I said, have a team in place who can go execute and act on those things.
Yeah, it's a little painful for me. I've had this experience many times over the last few years, mostly pre-pandemic, but still a bit recently. In comparison, just unfortunately between Worcester and Providence, and yeah, Worcester is somehow really killing it. It's painful to say.
That's crazy. It's Worcester.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. That's why I always say that. I'm like, I can see, whatever. But, we're trying to get past that. I think, just, to use my own example, people who watch these programs regularly know that somehow last year I missed paying my $50 registration for my business and got, what's the, I forget the term now, but either way, I was unregistered. My LLC was unregistered. So I was like, all right, no problem. It's only been a year. I could fix this. But in order to fix it, I had to get a form from taxation, which required other forms from taxation. And then I had to get those forms and get them over to the Secretary of State. And I'm like, why doesn't taxation, once this was all said and done, and I'm still waiting to get reauthorized. Why doesn't taxation and Secretary of State's office just communicate these documents directly? I'm in good standing. It's not a question.
It's my picture on the silos. It's not okay that one website is really good. I mean, that's fantastic. But ultimately, put yourself in your shoes. You've got to navigate all of them, and no one's helping you do that. We're designing the system so it works for you. I hear so many stories about the Department of Taxation, and the example. This again from my small business group settings where I'm listening to people and hearing their stories about getting notified that they're late on their taxes. They're really not, but the letter comes late, and then just the headaches, and then the idea that you're going to spend 4 hours waiting at the Department of Taxation while you should be focusing your energy on running your business. That's crazy, and we need to fix that, because if we fix that, we're going to lift people up to focus on what they're good at and allow our businesses to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was in the in this most recent budget that was passed, a role in the Department of Taxation, like a tax advisor, ombudsman. I think that's something that the small business community has been asking for ages. So it's nice to see that sort of thing moving forward. But we always also advocate for someone across all the departments. Whatever you want to call that. I think, you've got it here as a business navigator program. Could you talk a little bit about that idea?
Yeah, well, I think this has come from these listening sessions that I've had with small businesses where the question is, how do you, I think the ultimate answer is that we don't need a navigator because we actually have such a seamless system and it's online. I think the point, though, is until we get there, I want to create something so that it is less work for all of you who own small businesses. And I think it's some version of this Worcester example that we were just talking about, so that you don't have to go to the 13 different websites and locations to figure it all out, but you've got something simple that works for you. But the other thing that I really believe is that we start, if I can get enough people engaged in this, and I'd love everyone who's listening to this session to help me do this. I think what we're going to start to do is we're going to break down these silos, and we're going to start to get a series of small wins that gives people a sense of confidence and momentum that in Rhode Island, we could actually be great at this. We don't have to be the one that makes it so hard. And I know that it's complicated. There's municipalities. I wouldn't control all of that. But what I always did in my career of creating change in a big company, which is a bureaucracy, right? I worked in a big company and did many innovative things, is I found champions who would come on board soon. And then what happened is people around them saw them being successful because they were engaging with me. One of the things that I did in my career is I built the Extra Care loyalty program, that little red card at CVS. And we started that in 1997. And it was a great example of, initially I had all these wonderful long-term ideas of what I wanted to do. And I had this great mentor who called me up and he said, "How's it going, Helena?" And I said, "Oh, it's going to be great, Chris. We've got all these plans. In 4 years, we'll do this. In 5 years, we'll do this." And there was a long pause. And he said, "Helena, if you're not producing results in the next 6 months, your program won't be around in 4 years." And I think that's
Yeah.
what small businesses do, right? You got to make payroll every week or every month. You've got to, figure out supply chain issues while you aim for something bigger. And I want to help be the state where we can really make all these businesses thrive, because I think that's, again, how we lift people up and make sure they have great futures.
Well, what I found interesting in reading this on the Navigator is the idea of helping them to form new businesses, because there's lots
Yeah.
of folks in the last few years that decided, okay, I lost my job for pandemic or whatever it is, or it's changed, and I want to try something on my own.
Yeah.
And we're all, the Small Business Coalition is very much trying to help people like that. We help people like that all the
Right.
time, but it's a
Yeah.
process. It's not an easy process. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that idea in fostering new businesses and getting people to come here to Rhode Island for new businesses.
Yeah, well, again, I would actually say that one of the things. So my husband's always been involved in small business and startups, and he teaches business at Rhode Island School of Design. So he often gets he coaches a lot of RISD students who want to go start their own businesses, but he's also very much involved in mentoring startups and founders of companies. So he and I talk a lot about what that experience is for people in the state. And on the bright spot, what I will say is, I think versus 10 years ago, for everyone who's on this, listening to this, who was here a decade ago, I think that the environment is better for startups. We're eager, right? We want it, and there are more of them. He went to an event in Bristol last year, and he said, "Wow, Helena, it was so exciting compared to what was happening a decade ago." But my process for figuring out how do we make it even better is to sit and listen to people and say, what are the pain points you're experiencing that
Mhm.
we could break down? And I don't know all of them, but I do know how to create a good process so we can take an input on what are those pain points and start to pick off the ones that are harder than others. And that's the mindset and process that I would use around starting to attack this problem. Because again, if we're building out something like the blue economy, and regardless of whether it's in that sector or not, we want to be the state where it's incredibly exciting to come. The other thing I'll say, because you mentioned education very briefly before, I do think this is where education matters a lot.
Yeah.
And my experience over time at CVS, so I was there 25 years. I recruited hundreds of families to come work for us at CVS. And what I found was probably 9 times out of 10, people chose to live in Massachusetts, and they only did it for one reason, which was the public schools.
Yeah.
So they'd buy a house in Franklin, and then they'd, commute 20, 30 minutes to Woonsocket and have a great job. So when I talk to entrepreneurs in Rhode Island, what I often hear is, it's exciting to be near Brown and the hospital ecosystem, and I want to be part of the sector. But I'm trying to recruit, for example, these PhDs, and the PhDs don't really want to send their kids to our public schools, and they can't afford private schools. So we need to have a public sector, a public education system that works for everyone, where we're graduating kids who can be employed by these businesses, but we're also attracting new people, because that's how you thrive. You've got to have education, which is both a moral responsibility, but I really believe a huge economic opportunity for our state as well.
I would agree. I mean, I remember a few years ago judging a culinary competition. I've done a bunch at different schools around Rhode Island, but I did one a few years ago at Blackstone Valley Prep over the
Mhm.
line in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest, I was floored when I walked into that high school. I was like, "This is a high school. This looks like Johnson
Right.
and Wales."
Yeah.
It was an impressive school, and I'm not saying we can't get there here, Rhode Island. We're just not there yet. Let's talk about the fact. I mean, let's be honest. Schools, uh, a lot of the programs that we're talking about in the government small business, and part of the reason, just to go back to the Worcester example, that Worcester's been so
Mhm.
successful is because a lot of this stuff costs a lot of money, and Massachusetts has
Mhm.
put a lot of money into these things.
Yep.
How do you see Rhode Island being able to do that?
Yeah, sure. Look, I had proposed that we spend $500 million of our ARPA money. We were getting 1.1 billion in the federal government. My proposal was to spend 500 million of that on public school education and to take another $300 million school construction bond to make sure that our schools were the physical schools were much better, and then another 200 million, which I do think there's still a shot that the Democrats in DC get their act together on some version of Build Back Better and can help fund universal pre-K and pre-K for 3-year-olds if they start to skinny down the package. But look, unfortunately, a lot of that money looks like it will be spent. So we're going to have to step back and say, what are the most critical elements of the program and how do we find wins? And I know we can, because at the end of the day, I think government in many ways is like business in the sense that you make strategic choices. You decide where are there places we absolutely have to invest in and where do we not? And one of the things that I would absolutely do is make sure that we have an education first budget. So I would start with what do we need to have a really successful public education system, and then we would make choices for everything else in the budget around that. And that's the mindset that I would approach. That's what I'm sure most people listening to this program do. And I don't really see why government has to be different than business in that respect.
Okay, thank you. That makes sense. Let's also talk. I mean, part of what helps small businesses, what makes small businesses successful here, and draws people here is infrastructure. It's one of those non-exciting things, but it's true. You've mentioned broadband. When I was putting this together this morning and I was, looking at my notes, but my wife happened by and she's like, what about the roads? I was like, all right, I'll throw that in there. You're not wrong. Talk a little bit about, again, it's not extremely exciting, but infrastructure is hugely important.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
and we're going to be getting more money from the federal government for our roads. Absolutely. Look, I as I said to you before, I'm the oldest of 5, and 3 of us live in Rhode Island, and my 2 other sisters live in Massachusetts. And one of my sisters always makes fun of me. She crosses the border into Rhode Island. She says, "What the heck, Helena? Why are the roads so bad as soon as I hit Rhode Island?" I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that there are a lot of hardworking people, and yet I think we can come in and really sort of get to the bottom of, why does it take so long to make the 610 connector work? I don't know the answer to that, but I know if you looked 100 years ago, one of the things that was exciting in the United States of America is government made things work quickly. The Empire State Building was built in a year. Can you imagine that in this day and age that it was, that it took so little time? So one of the things that I'd love to be able to do for the state of Rhode Island is help people see how government really could work for businesses and really for the people who live here. And I do think that the roads are a very tangible example of people feeling down on ourselves for right reasons. So that's something I'd be working on too. But then to your point, there's also huge opportunity in broadband. We're a little state. There's no reason that there should be segments of the state where people don't have access to broadband. And so there's a lot we can do. We've left money on the table from the federal government. There's a lot of ways where I think we've been penny wise and pound foolish in terms of not really thinking strategically about infrastructure, and broadband's a very good example of that.
Yeah, no, it's a huge factor. And many businesses, a lot of the businesses I've worked with personally over the last few years needed to, e-commerce, create new websites and things of that nature. And obviously, the broadband would help that. A lot of small businesses have the advantage of being able to, turn to a large corporation for their broadband, but still, to reach a wider audience, the better the range, the better we can get people. Yeah. So that was all the notes that I grabbed off a small business. Like I said, there's all sorts of issues that a governor faces that that tackles and touches upon small business. So is there anything that I didn't mention that you wanted to bring up?
I think that what I'm first of all, thank you very much for looking at my website. We've spent a lot of time on it, and the reason that we did is I wanted people, that I'm running against people who've been in public sector really their whole lives. And so it's very fair to ask, what does someone like me bring to the equation? And one of the things that I think is really important is that people see the detail that we would get into. That education plan, for example, I have a lot of detail if people care to go to my website. But the other thing that I would highlight right now is that we're living in a very tenuous moment economically. And I worry about both obviously rising inflation, interest rates, and what it's going to mean for businesses and for the people of the state in the future if a recession comes. And so I will highlight that I think it's really important that we not create an additional tax burden on small businesses. And so one of my opponents just recently announced an increase in corporate taxes. And I think at the beginning it looked like this was just identified for big companies. But as we work to understand what it really meant, there were a lot of small businesses that would be affected by this. And I just think it's the wrong time to lead with tax increases. I really think we've got to figure out, we're just coming off of a $900 million surplus as a state. Now, all that money has been spent, but it's a moment to step back and say, are we spending the right amount? Are there opportunities to save money just like you would in business? And then where do we want to spend? And later we figure out what are the additional revenue needs, but I wouldn't lead with that. I think we've really got to figure out, especially in the next few years, I think we could come across some very rocky times economically.
Yeah.
And so having a leader at the helm of the state who understands business, understands the economy, I think is really important as I'm talking to people around the state.
Yeah, we're certainly entering some really, we've been in, and it's not going away. Some really unique economic times. So we should mention the website, HelenaFoulkes.com. Like I said, I drew up a lot of information from it. If you want to check it out, it's HelenaFoulkes.com. You can see her name spelled there on the screen for you to add to that website. This has been a really great conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. Good luck with everything. Again, for those of you watching, the primary is Tuesday, September 13th. So that's when you can vote for the Democratic candidate and the Republican candidate as well on that day, Tuesday, September 13th. Helena Buonanno, folks, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone.
Take care. So that's been another great episode of the forum. We've got more candidates coming up for you to listen to. We've got Ashley Kalis, as I mentioned, who's also running for governor coming up. And we've got Alan Fung, who is running for the second congressional, second congressional district seat. And so please check us out every 2 weeks here at noon. And it's always archived on our Facebook page. The website is risbc.org. It's risbc.org. We bought a smaller website, so it's easier for you to get to, risbc.org. And thank you again for joining us. Take care.